Hi everybody, welcome back to Right to the Top. I'm Adam. In today's video, I'm going to look at general academic writing, do's and don'ts, things you need to keep in mind when you have to do some academic writing. So let's get started. Okay, so our first question comes from Harun Kamau 4608, and he asks she asks a very general question. What are the do's and don'ts in academic writing? Now, when I say a very general question, the reason I say that is because academic writing is very broad. There are so many different things that you're going to need to write in school, in university, college, even high school. And they're all going to be very different in terms of approach, in terms of the style of the writing, in terms of what you have to include in it, how you're going to organize it, and things like that, right? So for example, a book report is not the same as a lab report. And a 200, 300, 500 word short answer is not going to be written in the same way as a 2,000 or 5,000 word term paper. So the things that I'm going to tell you apply very generally to everything, not to any specific type of writing. If you want to know more specifically about certain types of writing, you can ask me that in the comment section and I'll try to make a video for that as well. Okay. So let's start with the don'ts, things that you should not do when it comes to academic writing. Number one, don't write until you have a clear plan. Now, for those of you who have watched my older videos about IELTS writing and the old TOEFL writing test, which was an essay, I always say, before you start writing, make sure you have a good plan of what you're going to say. Now, this is, of course, very important when you have a very set time limit. But even when you don't have a set time limit, when the professor gives you 2 weeks or even a month to write your essay, still, you have to plan. And again, not just essay, book report, you have to plan, lab report, you have to plan. In certain cases, even an email, you should probably plan because you have the time to do it. And what does a plan do? It lets you get your ideas clear, first of all, and then organize how you're going to approach your answer. So this way, you don't end up writing things that have nothing to do with your topic. The only way to avoid that is to plan, to have a very focused look at what you're going to write before you start writing. Another don't use casual language in academic writing. What makes academic writing academic is the fact that it's formal, that has a very strong structure and has a very clear focus and a very clear purpose. And you're trying to achieve something very particular, especially if you're given an assignment, right? Like the professor wants you to do something specific or your teacher wants something specific. That's what you're going to have to do. And you have to do it very formally. The only time you can use casual language if that is what the assignment calls for. Right? In high school, for example, a teacher may want you to say, okay, write me a short essay, what I did last summer. Then just write freely. Once you get to university, they don't really give you those kinds of assignments anymore. They don't care what you did last summer. They want to know what you think about this book or about this topic or about this argument. And they want you to make a very clear, strong, convincing presentation about that. And casual language weakens that argument, right? So don't use slang, don't use colloquialisms, which are like a bit like street language, like old-fashioned language that people use casually, and don't use jargon. Always think that you're writing to a layperson, so don't use too much technical language, but keep it very formal and professional. A very, very important don't submit your first draft. Now, when I was in university, I have to admit, I used to write my essays, a lot of my essays I wrote the night before. I would sit down, write it, hand it in. I didn't get very high grades on those papers, right? It's the ones that I took my time with, that I wrote well in advance, that I left alone for a few days. I came back to, I did editing, I did rewriting, I looked for errors, I looked for things that I missed or things that don't make sense, and I cleaned it up. Those were the papers that I got very high scores on. So always give yourself enough time to edit, to rewrite, to rethink a little bit, and keep in mind that as you're going to go from draft to draft, you're also going to tighten your writing. So my first suggestion always, whenever you're going into your second draft, your first thing to do is try to cut 5 to 10% of the word count. As soon as you remove all those extra words, you'll see your paper start to tighten and your ideas will start to tighten and focus more, right? And that's the whole point of editing. So definitely don't submit your first draft. 3-4 drafts is probably a good idea. Another thing about academic writing, and this is what makes it academic as opposed to other types of writing, don't turn it into a personal narrative. Don't use the pronouns I, me, or my, although you can do this, and in these days it's a bit more acceptable. But what I mean by a personal narrative is don't write the essay or the whatever you're writing, the paper, the review, the report, the summary about yourself. Keep your focus on the topic, on the subject itself, because that is what you're writing about. Now, if you have to write a paper about yourself, about your own personal ideas about something or your experiences in something, obviously that's different. That's going to be a personal narrative. In college, they very rarely ask you for that. Most of the things you're going to be writing in college or university is going to be very focused on, first of all, the subject matter, what you've read in the textbooks, and especially what you heard in the lectures. And just a little bit of a tip, professors want to know that you've paid attention in class. They want to see that you can, the word is regurgitate, basically means bring back up their words. They want you to say what they said as much as you can and then give your own ideas appropriately and in relation to that, okay? And the last one, and this is a very common error that people make when writing because it tends to be easy to do. Don't have extra long paragraphs, okay? Short paragraphs, have one focus, have a topic sentence, a clear focus, finish that focus, start a new paragraph, next focus, new paragraph, next focus. When you have very long paragraphs, A, the reader's going to get bored or just lose focus. B, you are going to lose focus as you're writing because if you're way deep into a paragraph and you've lost touch with your topic sentence, you're going to go all over the place in terms of ideas and things are not going to connect. And then you lose the flow of the writing. Short paragraphs, point, focus, elaborate, point, focus, elaborate, and so on and so forth. So those are 5 don'ts. Now let's look at 5 do's. Okay, so the 5 do's. Make sure you know the structure and style of what you're writing. So as I mentioned before, different assignments or different types of writing are going to have different structures, different purposes, different approaches. Make sure you know what you're writing and how to write it. If you're writing a book report, you're going to start with maybe a general synopsis, or maybe you're going to start with introducing the characters. Then you're going to give a plot overview. Then you're going to give your own interpretation of certain elements of the book, and so on and so forth. So you have certain sections for this particular type of writing. If you're going to write a lab report, you're going to have certain sections and a particular type of writing. If you're going to have an essay, you're going to have an introduction to the whole topic. You may want to give a little bit of a background. You may want to give a little bit of important details on how you came about getting your opinion. Give the facts. Give the synopsis, get to the conclusion, right? So everything has a particular structure. Make sure you know what you're doing, how to do it. And again, that goes back to the don't start writing until you have a good plan, until everything's well organized. You have the skeleton of the assignment, then start, putting meat on the bones, as they say. Second, do assume. Usually I say never assume anything when you're writing, but do assume one thing about your reader. Assume that your reader is not an expert in the topic. Even though you're writing this to your professor and you know your professor is going to be reading it and your professor obviously is an expert, academic writing should be focused on the layperson. A layperson is an everyday person who's smart enough and can read, but doesn't know your subject matter. So you don't want to use too many big words. You don't want to get too detailed in the technical aspects. You want to make everything very clear that somebody who's not in this field can still read it and get a very good sense. Maybe they won't understand everything, but they can get a good sense of what you're trying to say. That is a well-written paper, if you can do it so other people can understand it. Next, and this is a little bit hard to do. You have to focus on it. You have to pay attention because a lot of people don't pay attention as they're writing, but try to use more verbs than nouns and adjectives and adverbs, and especially use active voice verbs rather than passive verbs. Now, you'll see a lot of people telling you, oh, never use the passive in writing. It's bad writing. There's a reason the passive exists. If it wasn't good writing, it wouldn't exist. Nobody would use it and it would be forgotten, right? The passive is there for a reason. There are specific reasons for using a passive. And I've actually made a video, an older video, about when to use the passive. Watch that video, because when you have a very good reason to use the passive, use it. Otherwise, stick to the active voice. It gives your writing strength, right? Because active voice means active. Action is happening. It's moving forward all the time. Passive, you're bringing in agents, you're making it like seem a bit weaker. So try to avoid it unless there's a specific reason for it. Another do. And again, now we're getting into a bit of language topics. Check your pronouns and make sure that it is always crystal clear what they refer to. It's very easy to cause the reader to lose focus when you have pronouns that refer to other nouns, but it's not clear what's being referred to. So if you're using it, make sure I know what that it is pointing to. If you're using they, make sure I know who they are or what they are. He, she, it, this, they, them, it, etc. All of these pronouns or any other reference words, it has to be very, very clear what it's referring to, because if I have to go back and look to try to figure out what you're saying and who you're saying it about, you've lost my attention. Maybe I don't go back and I don't continue reading, and that's it. Your essay is not so good anymore, right? Don't underestimate pronouns. And lastly, and this is probably the most important tip you should take away from this whole video, always cite. Cite, C-I-T-E, means if you're using somebody else's ideas or somebody else's words, tell the reader that it is somebody else's words, somebody else's ideas, say where you got this information and give credit. And also don't forget to put all this information in the works cited page or the bibliography, whatever your professor wants you to call it. Otherwise, if you use somebody else's ideas or words, this is called plagiarism. It basically means copying. In university, you will be kicked out for doing that. If it's a major flaw, if it's a major feature of your writing. People have lost their entire careers because of plagiarism. So be very careful about it. If you know it's not your idea, say so. It's not a bad thing to use other people's works. That's the whole point. You're there to learn, to read other people's works, to read other authors, other thinkers. Use their ideas. Just make sure you tell the reader that you're using somebody else's ideas. Okay? And there you have 5 do's, 5 don'ts. Very general, I know. If you have more specific questions, ask me in the comment section and I'll make videos about more specific academic writing topics. Okay? So that's it. So I hope these answers were a bit helpful. If you have more questions about these topics, you can ask me below. If you like the video, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I'll be answering your questions on a regular basis. Don't click the notification button to know when I'm making a new video. Press like if you like the video, and I'll keep making more of these as I go. And I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.